Okay, so I guess I'll start. I have no idea why my video now isn't working. I apologize. Let's see if I can make that work so you can at least see my face. Yeah, never mind. I'll just get on with it. This is just
okay. Yeah. Just a bad tech day, but thank you, Kira. Go on.
Yeah, that's right. So thanks everyone for joining. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kira Zumkley and I'm the head of photography and digitisation at the Victorian Orbit Museum. And today I'm going to talk to you about a holistic approach to collections digitisation on the example of an 18th century amber cabinet from our collection. So this is the object I will be spending all of today talking about. It is an amber cabinet by Johann Georg Zernebach. It's about 300 years old and was made in Gdansk, Poland. It consists of a wooden core, and absolutely every single surface of that wooden core is covered in amber. Transparent, translucent amber, cloudy amber, beige, orange, brown. Everything you see here is amber, including the little kind of figurine on top. It's fairly small, about 40 centimeters high, 30 wide, and 20 deep. And if you're interested in looking this item up on our Collections Online website, then that is the museum number that identifies this object. And what you can kind of not really see here just yet is that what makes this cabinet even more special is that it includes, I think, more than close to 40 engravings underneath some of these amber panels. So if you look really closely here on the door on the right-hand side, if you look at that kind of oval gemstone in the middle and you go up from there, you can see a small amber panel, and you can just about make out that there's a scene inside. And these scenes are basically engraved onto the backside of the amber, and then the amber is stuck onto gold leaf, and that's what brings out these scenes. So here is an example of what these scenes look like. There's a man here walking over a bridge with a house on the right-hand side and a tree on the left-hand side. And just to give you an idea of scale, this man that you see here is about 3 millimeters height. So it is absolutely minuscule. So the level of engraving and detail they managed to get in just those few millimeters is really astounding. And that's what makes this object even more special. So why did we end up doing the amount of imaging on this object that we did? So in 2022, we were approached by the National Amber Museum in Gdansk. They wanted to put on an exhibition in July, September, and August of 2024, so the 300-year anniversary of this specific piece. And they had asked us to loan them this object. And usually what happens when someone requests a loan from us, we would just simply get the object into our studio, take photographs, so document it thoroughly before it then goes out on loan. However, this specific object had not been on display for several decades. The amber had deteriorated just simply from age quite significantly, and so it needed a lot of conservation work before it could go out on loan. So throughout 2023, this cabinet underwent conservation. And because the work carried out on it was quite substantial, and also it was such an interesting piece, it was decided that we would not only photograph the object once conservation was completed in the studio, but we would also document the conservation process. So that meant that we got in touch with our conservation colleagues. The project here was led by senior conservator Adriana Francescotto Miro. And so she talked us through the different stages that would happen during the conservation process. And we made sure that we captured all of them. And that was the sort of story that works quite well on our social media, on our blogs, on our websites. It's just a nice story of the sort of work we've got going on behind the scenes. So here on the left-hand side, you can see Adriana grinding paint and mixing it up to retouch some of the areas on the wood that were damaged and needed modern intervention. And then again, here on the right-hand side, you can see her working very precisely in retouching up those affected areas. She also had to fill small holes in between the amber panels with, kind of little conservation tissue, pieces of paper. The reason was that obviously the wooden core underneath the amber panels, due to age, had started to shift and just kind of twist. And as a result, there were small gaps between the amber panels. So by stuffing this tissue paper inside, it meant that any sort of damage that could occur during transport with the panels becoming loose, that sort of risk was minimized. So that's what you see here. Adriana also applied additional gold leaf, specifically under the amber panels that had the engravings, to make sure that they were much better visible than they were before. So again, the way these engravings work, you have the amber panel itself. Onto the back of the amber panel, that's where they engraved the scenes. And then that amber panel got stuck onto the gold foil, and that's how the scenes came alive. And so finally, Adriana applied some varnish, and of course, I just wanted to stress that all this intervention is completely reversible and non-invasive. But as you can see here, this was the panel before the conservation intervention. If you didn't know there was a scene and an engraving underneath, you would have had no chance of figuring that out. Whereas on the right, you can see the scene very clearly and how beautifully that has come out after the conservation intervention. So the next thing that would have happened usually is that the object would have now come to us into the studio to do our kind of standard photography. However, what was discovered during conservation was that there was actually a drawer on the bottom of the cabinet. So you can kind of see that here. If you look at Adriana's hand and then you kind of follow that down, there's the two kind of big oval amber panels, and you continue going down, and then there's a section kind of sectioned off from the rest, and that actually contains a drawer. But because the wood had warped to such an extent, we couldn't open the drawer without possibly damaging the object, which is obviously the last thing you want to do. So as a result, we were asked to carry out X-ray imaging, which is what we did. So here you can see what the panel, the cabinet looks like in a standard photograph, and then the same view and angle on the right in the X-ray. You can see a couple of metal pins and screws, which give you an idea of how this object was constructed. You can see the metal clasp on the back of the doors, and you can also see the drawer here at the bottom, but clearly it is empty, which on the one hand is good because we don't have to try and figure out what's inside and how to get it out. But on the other hand, it would have been nice if there had been something fun and hidden inside. And just for good measure, we also did an X-ray from the side, which kind of showed the lock and the clasps quite well, and just a few other areas of kind of internal construction. So once that was completed, the object finally came into our studio for our standard studio photographs. So usually that means we photograph it from the front. Here, obviously, we had the doors open and closed. We took a close-up of the individual drawers that you can pull out. We did a close-up of the internal bits of the doors. So that's the sort of photography we would do for an item going on loan. However, at this point, it had become apparent that obviously the conservation team had done an amazing job in making those amber panel engravings more visible, but also that there was no scope for putting this object on display here in London at the Victoria and Albert Museum once it came back from loan. So it would go back into storage. And that was, and at that point, the curator was really keen to give it at least a bigger online presence. If we can't put it on display, then given we've done all this work to it and we have kind of rediscovered rather, these beautiful engravings, that is something, if we can't offer it in person, we should at least try and capture it as best as we can to enable people to view it online. And so the curator, also called Kira, so slightly confusing, not many people with my name, but the curator on this one is also called Kira. So Kira, the curator, she approached us asking if we could take detailed photographs of those individual scenes. So here, it's just another example. And she had done some research as well, and she had found that actually a lot of these scenes and mottos came from a book by Jeremiah Wolfe from 1714. If I had my notes, I could translate it for you, but I'm not going to even try to pronounce the Latin title or try to translate it ad hoc. But yeah, so that's the book, and you can see that it kind of contains both these individual scenes as well as mottos, both in French, Italian, Latin, and German. And a lot of the scenes were almost one-to-one copies of what is contained in this book. So actually, let me go back. So one of the tricky bits was, which you can kind of see here in this picture, when we attempted just standard photography with a standard camera and a light, because the amber was both kind of dome-shaped, that created problems with the sort of highlights captured by the flash. You can see that quite well here, how kind of at the top there is this big highlight which is obscuring some of the details. And then also, because as much as conservation had done an amazing job in clearing up these panels, they still had a significant amount of cloudiness and especially micro cracks, which is just simply part of amber aging. There's nothing, that's just simply how this material works. So these cracks won't ever go away. They're just inherent to the material. But they obviously captured the light in such a way that standard photography really didn't give us the sort of results we were after. So what we did instead was we used a technique called cross polarization. So again, here on the right-hand side, I think you can see a bit better what I mean by there being kind of like these micro cracks, and that they would really catch the light in such a way that we felt we weren't kind of documenting these scenes to the best of our ability. So what is cross-polarization, and why did we choose to use that in this specific case? Cross-polarization is a technique that allows the reduction and or elimination of glare and reflections by effectively using two cross-polarizing filters. So the way it works is here on the graph on the left-hand side. Imagine you have your camera pointed at your object and you have your light source illuminating your object. Now your light source just emits light, just standard light that scatters everywhere. By putting a polarizing filter in front of it, what you do is you effectively eliminate all light except for the light that can travel through the polarizing filter. In this case, in the graph, this is the sort of horizontal line you see there. So now that light travels, only kind of light going in this horizontal direction travels onto your object. From there, it gets reflected, and that reflected light, the specular reflection, is what travels towards your camera. If you now have a polarizing filter in front of your camera, perpendicular to the filter you have in front of your light, that specular reflection also gets filtered out, because you're now filtering out all horizontal light. So it's just all the specular reflection is basically completely filtered out, meaning what comes into your camera is an image without any sort of reflection information whatsoever. And what that does is, you can see here on the left-hand side, the standard photograph, and especially the way it kind of really captures those sort of micro cracks in the amber. And then on the right-hand side is the cross-polarized image. And as you can see, the reflections are completely eliminated. And as a result, you have a very, very beautiful and clear image of this engraving. And that is what we did for every single engraving in Motto. And like I said, there's about 40 of them. Usually we really should be done at this point. However, like I said, it had become clear that we wouldn't be able to put this item on display. And what makes that item so, it's such a shame it can't go on display for the time being, because what you do immediately as you stand in front of it and you realize that there are these tiny, tiny engravings, you start moving your head around. You get your camera phone out, you turn on the torch, and you start moving that around. And depending on how you change the lighting and how you change the angle of your head, different aspects of that scene would kind of come more and less to life. And so that sort of interaction, really kind of that feeling of revealing more and more as you move toward, in different angles towards the object. That is something that the curator was quite keen to explore, to what extent we could offer that experience digitally online. And the most obvious technique that comes to mind that can kind of simulate this sort of stuff is reflectance transformation imaging. So that's what we ended up trying to do. Apologies, again, I haven't got my notes. I thought, because those scenes are beautiful, I just threw a couple of slides in here actually just for you guys to see these stunning scenes. There's ships, there's little mythical creatures, lots of plant life, lots of architecture. The person also really liked people with canes. So there's a bunch of little people walking around. Here is another one on a bridge. And again, just to remind you, this little person on the bridge would be about 3 millimeters in height. So it is really, really astounding the sort of detail they managed to get here. Up there's an Italian motto, Latin motto, and a little kind of, what is it, a waterfall or a fox or something like that. But yes, sorry, apologies. So going back to exploring reflectance transformation imaging. and to what extent that could digitally recreate this sort of feeling of revealing parts of the amber engravings. So again, for those of you who aren't familiar with this technique, it's a computational photographic method that captures a subject's surface shape and color and enables the digital interactive relighting of the subject from any direction. There's two methods that you can use. One is called the highlight method, and one is called, one uses a dome. We don't have a dome at the V&A, and it doesn't really make sense for the sort of work we do. So instead, we use the highlight method. And this works by having the camera in a stable position. The camera cannot move during the process at all. And likewise, the object doesn't move at all. And then you place several black spheres in the scene. And again, those mustn't move. So the only thing that moves per image is your light source, a single light source, a single flash that goes off. You take anything between the bare minimum 12 images, but usually more something like 40. And every time you take a picture, the flash goes off, you move the position of the flash, you take another picture, you move the position of the flash, you take another picture. And ideally, the way you move the flash is the distance to the object remains the same, but you travel in a clockwise motion and then also kind of up. So you create this sort of dome shape to ensure that the object is lit from as many directions as possible. And what the spheres do is spheres capture the position of the flash going off in a, in a single kind of pin type reflection. And then you put all of the individual images you've captured into the software, and the software then analyzes the spheres, the reflections on the spheres, and based on that understands where the light has come from, and then creates a reflectance transformation image for you. And that kind of gives you that possibility of lighting the object from different areas. It's primarily used in kind of more archaeological pieces, let's say. So a cuneiform tablet, a relief of some kind, maybe a deeply embossed piece of paper even. But where this was kind of very experimental was the fact that the engraving was underneath the amber panel. So the examples that I've given you just now is like a, an embossed piece of paper, a cuneiform tablet, a relief, is you apply the technique directly onto the surface that you're trying to visualize. Whereas we have the problem that the engraving is on the back of the amber panel, and we therefore have this dome-shaped amber on top of it. So we weren't quite sure what we were going to get, but we're going to give it a go anyways. So I'm just going to hop out here and I'll share a different screen. She says I may have to share my entire screen because it doesn't seem to see the program that I would like to share. So just let me know. Can you see this?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So you can see the sort of amber situation and in the software, yeah?
Not now. Now you're back on Zoom.
Okay. Yeah. So this is one of the amber panels. We tried it on one of the really big ones. We thought that might be slightly easier for us. So now we're in the software, and as you can see here up in the top right-hand corner, that is where I can now start digitally moving my light source around. It follows my cursor. And we're kind of, we're getting a little bit of this sort of effect of as the light moves, different bits of the object are being revealed. But of course, as was kind of expected, the fact that there is this amber panel on top of the relief, and not only that, the amber panel is severely kind of, shows sign of aging, these micro cracks I was talking about. because RTI is based on a standard photograph. And as I said before, the problem we had with the standard photograph was that it was catching all these highlights, and therefore the same problem persisted in the RTI itself. So while it wasn't completely unsuccessful, it wasn't successful to the extent that we we thought this would be worthwhile pursuing further. So let me jump into my other presentation again. Where is it? There we go. Okay. So yeah, I mean, this is the other thing I wanted to mention about RTIs is that once you've created this digital interactive, of course, you can start to manipulate it computationally, and that's where a lot of the beauty lies with RTI, because suddenly you can sharpen it, you can desaturate it, you can do all sorts of things with it you can't do with the original object, and that's really where the power of this technique lies, and the fact that it remains interactive as you apply these changes. That really is what makes RTI stand out. But like I said, we didn't really think that it replicated the sort of effect you were experiencing as you were standing in front of the real object. So what happened next was the object at that point was due to go on loan. So it went to Gdansk for several months. But I just couldn't get this out of my head. I was so frustrated with the fact that the results were just not on par with what I had hoped, and I'm a huge believer in using kind of these advanced imaging techniques not only for research and therefore kind of have it accessible only to a few individuals, usually internal or university researchers, but that there is real power in using these for public engagement, and not in a way that simplifies it too much, because the public may not understand. I really believe that if you use this technique and this information in the right way, you can kind of you can interest people in historical objects who usually would never be caught dead in a museum, right? Because they find it way too boring. It's not their cup of tea. Yet another painting to look at. Why on earth would I be interested? But they may actually be interested in how thick the paint was, or the fact that there is vermilion white and what that means for the story of the making of this painting, rather than the fact that it's from France showing a king. So that's the sort of thing I personally am really, really keen on. So whilst the object was on loan, I kept thinking about if we could do this better. And Foutini, if you don't mind, stop recording at this point, because I'm just going to jump into something that